Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Living the Sweet Life. I'm your host, TJ Sweet, and on this podcast, we are committed to helping you go from where you are to where you want to be. And we help you do that by helping you learn how to reshape your mindset, how to live with intention, and then learn how to look at the world through a grateful lens. And first, I want to say thank you for taking time to tune in to these episodes. As you know, we're shaking things up and bringing new content and new ways for you because we want to add the most value to you, your mind, your heart, and your life. So on this episode, I get to have Brian Swino from Swino Visuals. I get to have him again with me in the studio. And we are going to dive in to a really powerful topic that is probably going to make some of you kind of question where you are, question what you're doing, but also take some ownership for some things in your life. So if you're feeling stuck, if you're not having confidence to kind of to learn how to take on some tough things, this episode's for you. So we're going to title this episode, The Power of Doing Hard Things on Purpose. We're going to walk through defining what hard even means. And then we're both going to share some stories about our own personal triumphs of overcoming the decisions sometimes to do the hard things. It's not always easy. And we'll talk about how we don't want the hard things to get easier. We just want to get better at handling those hard things. So if you're somebody who's ready to kind of maybe take on some of those things that you say that you want to do, but you're not sticking to, or maybe the things that you just keep saying that you can't because it's hard, this is going to be that episode. And then we are going to kind of finish off this episode. It's actually going to be a couple parts because there's so much that we want to share with you all. And you don't want to miss how 5 simple words transform the way Brian's thinking and the way he's in this chapter of doing to build a business that's going to make a difference in your life through our lives. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you take some time to think about some of the hard things in your life so that you can get better at handling hard things. Instead of avoiding them, you get excited about facing them. All right, Brian, first of all, I want to say thanks for spending time being on this side of the camera again, like we've talked about on these first couple episodes. You seem to be getting more comfortable being on this side, so yeah. I appreciate that. And honestly, to also tell you, everybody that listens and watches these podcasts is raving about you being on the show. And so just know that it means a lot to me, but it also means a lot to everybody else. And they're actually more quoting the things that you're saying and less of the things that I'm saying, which I'm grateful for, right? Because I've gotten the chance to get to know you a little bit more. And so thank you, first of all, for caring as much as you do about the show, but also about the listeners. Mm-hmm. It means a lot to me, and they can tell. So yeah. Thank you for that.
I appreciate all you guys for listening, and hopefully between all my rambling, you can take some bits of something out of it. So.
Yeah. Never rambling, just sharing.
Well, there's train tracks, and I go on side rails sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we navigate these things together. So I want to talk. We've talked about this topic a couple different times, and it's something that I think we're going to be able to share some insight on doing hard things on purpose. Right. So kind of committing to doing those hard things in our life. We're going to kind of play around with some examples, but also kind of define what that means to us. So is there something, whenever I say the power of doing hard things on purpose, when I say that, what kind of first comes to your mind about some of the hard things that you're doing on purpose?
Well, one of the big things I like to do now is run. And I know there's like a fad right now, basically, on social media of becoming either like a hybrid athlete. You got bodybuilders. If anyone's in that space on YouTube, the fitness space, I've watched that for probably 15 years. That's how I actually got started making videos. I was actually making videos of myself playing guitar and then going to the gym sort of things. Okay. And so that was like my first 100 videos of myself was me pretending to be a fitness influencer sort of thing. And definitely didn't work out. But
not yet.
So that space is becoming more of like that hybrid athlete mixing all aspects of fitness, which is great for that space and the overall health of people. And one thing that has come up a lot is running. People are mixing that in with their training. CrossFit athletes doing that. Bodybuilders are doing that. Realizing you can't be as one-dimensional. But I've been a runner my whole life. I ran track in high school, but I was always a sprinter. Like very short distance, 100 to 200 meters, maybe a 400 every once in a while, which is a quarter mile, one lap around the track. But that's about as far. I wanted to go as short a distance as possible, as fast as possible, and be done. And so running long distance never came easy for me whatsoever. And I recognized that a couple of years ago. I wanted to start putting myself intentionally in those hard positions and putting myself out there, public speaking and doing things like that are hard, quote unquote, but it's just nerve-wracking, basically. You're not as comfortable doing it. It requires some sort of effort that you maybe wouldn't otherwise be putting out. That's what we can, if we define hard as that, then there's a lot of different variables that it can apply to anyone in any scenario in their life. But I chose to start working on that weakness that I had, which was running longer distances, which for me at that point was anything a mile or more. And so I was terrible. I couldn't get through 1 mile, even though I'm in decent shape. I've always worked out regularly and I've always been in pretty decent shape. It takes a different level of shape to run multiple miles without fatiguing, and having to crawl basically. And so those first couple weeks I was walking half of it. I would pick a point that I wanted to run to, the next light pole or whatever. I would run to that and then give myself a little moment to, I know you have to build up your cardio base to get, so I see the end goal is I want to run the whole mile. And we've kind of talked about how I frame things as like a challenge, and I set a goal and then kind of work backwards from that. So if my goal was to run a whole mile without walking, then I know I need to run a lot of miles with walking as little as possible. And every time I try to walk less. And so I've done that pretty consistently for about the last 3 to 4 years. And now I'm running 6 to 8 miles without having to walk. And it's just crazy to look back and see that just over the last couple of years in my free time. It's not like I'm not running marathons and dedicating training blocks and things like that. Running has become sort of my escape. And I put on an audiobook or listen to your podcast or another podcast, and I soak up information in audiobooks and then just kind of let my body do its thing and go for a run. And so on that realm, I make it less hard on myself because I'm tackling multiple aspects at once. I'm doing something that I enjoy, which is learning information, and I focus on that rather than the fact that my legs feel like Jell-O, 1 mile in, and I got 6 miles left or 7 miles left or whatever. Yeah. So just putting myself in that scenario of doing a hard thing, which is running a longer distance, reframing it as this is an opportunity for me to have an hour or an hour and a half, 2 hours by myself to soak up information. I kind of reframe the challenge and with that goal in mind of here's 6 miles. I got to start out, but you got to start out with those first steps to get you to the first 6 miles. You got to pass mile 1 to get to mile 2. And so I just break it down into smaller steps like that. Yeah. And I think that's something that an actionable thing that people could take from that is you don't have to be running, running doesn't have to be your thing. For a lot of people, it's not, but anyone could benefit from doing that. And that is, I would think, a hard thing that anyone could do if you have the ability to go running or go for a walk, that could be the first step that someone takes. I know you've talked about that before of having the surgeries on your knee, and maybe you can speak to some of the adverse, things, not that you did that intentionally, but like you intentionally have rehabbed, you've intentionally put yourself in uncomfortable spots of walking, going to walking your dogs and all that stuff that will then lead you to the outcome you want at some point. So
yeah. Well, and so some of that adversity that you kind of talk about, is obviously we did an episode on that recently, and really what we're talking about today is kind of really in the nitty gritty and in the trenches of adversity, which is doing the hard things, right? Which is overcoming adversity. It's hard to stay in the adversity, and it's also hard to leave it. So you hear people all the time talk about choose your hard. Right? Like choose the hard that you actually feel empowered you can do something with. So But yeah, for me, so I set New Year's manifestations. Some people call them resolutions or goals. But it's just really things that I'm committing to actually accomplishing. And walking 1 mile this year was on my list. Now, I used to also run 20 miles a week. And now I can barely jog, if we're going to call it that. It's a bit faster than walking, right? But I also had to like kind of humble myself and think like, okay, what do I need to do? Because I couldn't walk 100 yards a year ago, right? So like going that mile, like while and that's the hard thing sometimes too when it comes to challenges, if you will, and doing the hard things is it didn't used to be hard, but it is now, and that crushes people. It hurts their confidence. So if you just kind of recognize like where I am now, it didn't used to be hard, but used to be doesn't matter when it comes to the hardness of something. And so even for you right now, a big lesson here too, and it's really more of on the other side of doing hard things, the hardness of the thing doesn't change. You just get better, stronger, faster, more resilient, more confident, because 6 miles is still the same 6 miles. You know, it's still the same distance. But for you, it's not hard anymore because of what you've grown, how you've developed, all these different things. So it's a matter of like, if you find something in your life that's hard, it's not wishing it were easy. It's actually just digging into committing to getting better so that it doesn't feel so hard. Right? Like hard things actually bring out more in us than the easy things. You know, and there's growth mindset. So Carol Dweck wrote a book about this, and even children. So if she gave children simple math problems that were like 2 + 2, these kids weren't challenged. They didn't find any fulfillment from it. They're like, I already know this. And then she did 1 + 1, 2 + 2. And like you would think being right and seeming smart was more rewarding, but it was easy. Then she gave another same age group multiplication, 114 times 12, all these things. They failed more often, but when they got it right, it mattered. So the whole point of that is when we accomplish the hard thing, it means a lot more than just choosing the easy thing. Now, running 6 miles never feels easy mentally.
Yeah.
It's just not as hard.
Definitely hasn't for me anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's just not as hard. Right. And that's like kind of a lesson in life is not avoiding hard, but facing it, kind of embracing it. You know, when you talk about the surgeries, I couldn't go up and down stairs, but I knew when I was doing my rehab every single day for hours a day that I knew I wanted to play golf. I knew I wanted to walk my dogs. Like I knew I wanted to do more hard things, but the hardest thing I had to do in the moment was try to bend my knee. You know, so like hard all of a sudden seems simple, right? So simple and easy, there's a big difference between the two.
Right.
But, you know, even on those days when, you know, you started to feel good about running, and we have to talk about this, but are there days to where even though you're more confident, you're maybe your physical fitness is in a different level, that even those hard things you still don't want to do? Do you ever encounter that? And like, how do you get through those days and those moments when you're like, it's just easier not to?
Well, the weather, for instance, is a big factor that's totally unknown. And if you run outside in the elements, if it looks like it might rain, that's a real good excuse to not go for a run, you know, because I might get 3 miles out and it starts downpouring on me. But there's another analogy of just going to the gym. Not all these analogies need to be physical things, but the hardest part of going to the gym is going to the gym, you know, for a lot of people. If you can just get yourself there. And so I literally went out and bought 3 pairs of shorts. Those are my running shorts. So now I know no matter what, one of those 3 are going to be clean, you know, and I go to my closet, I put those shorts on. I have a specific thing. I have like a little, it looks like almost like a fanny pack, but it's a little bit cooler than a fanny pack.
Packs are back, man. They're cool.
It looks a little cooler than that, but it like holds water and it holds my phone. And so I go in my closet, I get the shorts, I get that thing, I go set it on the table, put the shorts on, put my shoes on before I have the chance to talk myself out of doing any of it. And so I have built up a routine of get this, get this, get this. I'm ready to run. I tell my family I love them and bye, because you never know what's going to happen. You know, wearing headphones, I'm running on the road, you never know what happens. So always make sure to tell my kids I love them and Mary and take off running. I don't give myself the chance to run myself out of it, you know?
Yeah.
Or, you know, if you're going to the gym, if you have a big long drive to get to the gym, that's probably going to stand in the way. And if there's a day where you're feeling unmotivated, then you're probably not going to make it to the gym.
Yeah.
That's the difference between being disciplined and being motivated. Motivation is very, very in the moment.
Yeah.
And you can listen to TJ on YouTube and be motivated. And then if you don't do anything with that motivation, then it just falls on its face.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of people, I think, stand in their own way a lot. You can be as motivated as you want, but if you never take the action to do it, we've been talking about my life right now. I'm trying to be in for the rest of the year, just focus on doing things, whether it's hard things or not. Renovating our whole office in here to be multiple studios, that's hard. It's hard for me. That's not my natural state of, I'm going to go pick out this stuff and buy this and, design this and lay out this. That's hard for me. Mm-hmm. It's not actually physically demanding or hard per se, but that's not something that's natural for me. That's unnecessary effort that I wouldn't ever do other than to do that.
Yeah.
So that's what, I don't know. You can think about hard things in a lot of different ways. And I think it resonates differently for anyone.
Yeah.
But if you remove as many barriers as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key. If you need to do something that's hard, remove all the variables you can. And if you want to drink more water, put water beside your bed, Then if you wake up in the middle of the night, you reach for the water bottle rather than going to the fridge to get a soda or whatever.
Yeah.
That's something I am currently actually doing. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't come natural to me as much. I want to get your thoughts on this real quick. I watched a podcast. It was David Goggins. Mm-hmm. If we want to talk about hard things,
right?
That's the guy
Stay
of
hard.
hard things.
Stay hard.
His quote is "Stay hard."
Yeah.
But he's an athlete. He's an endurance athlete. Does a lot of things. Was in the Navy SEALs. He has a whole big backstory. If you don't know anything about David Goggins, I would highly recommend checking it out. Yeah. Whether you take something positive from it or negative from it, I've learned a lot from him and his books just on how I either do want to operate or don't want to operate. Mm-hmm. And there's, I think, benefits of what he says and what he thinks and learning other people's mindsets. That's what this whole podcast is about, Mm-hmm. So he did a podcast with Andrew Huberman. Yeah. And they were talking literally about this subject of doing hard things on purpose. And they brought up some of the science behind it. And that if you do something unwillingly that's hard, it doesn't have the same effect on your brain as if you intentionally put yourself in it. Like it can intentionally rewire those circuits in your brain to make the next hard thing easier also.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously all this stuff kind of starts and stops in the brain. It's all choices and the things that we think, how we feel about ourselves, how we think about the challenge. And so it's all brain science, but it also means that we have the opportunity to grow because our brains are growing every day. We always have capability every day. And it's really taking moments of recognition of when you do a hard thing, taking a moment to think, how did I get that done? Right. And so for me, one of the hard things that I do all the time, and it's, yes, there's a health benefit to it, but the thing that I love to do the most is I want to prepare myself to do things that I don't feel like doing. I think oftentimes we fall into this trap of feeling like doing, like we'll be motivated when we feel like it. When our motivation's high, when we feel all the things, right, then the brain is in peak state. So then it's easy to do those things. Mm-hmm. But we don't have a plan for when our brain and say we're tired, say we're overwhelmed, say we're stressed, whatever the thing is. So the brain's already kind of in a survival mode. So how do you get it back to thriving mode? So that's kind of the brain shift from, the amygdala, which is fear response to adversity, right? As opposed to get it back to the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of our brain and the forward sense of our actions that they actually matter. And so Huberman and Dave, when they've talked, I haven't listened to this episode yet, but I'm sure so much of this is just this building blocks of doing one hard thing every day. Mm-hmm. Now, you can define it, whatever the hard is for you in any way that you can. But so for me, one of the hard things that I like to do now is, and sometimes I just do it just to see what I'm capable of. So whenever I hiked in the Grand Canyon, I did 48 miles in the Grand Canyon, 24 hours straight. a 5,000 feet of elevation change. Now fun to find out I actually did that all with torn cartilage in my knee. And people are like, why would you do that? And my real response is, I just wanted to see if I could. Mm-hmm. Like, it was incredibly difficult in every sense, a mental sense, a physical sense, a spirit sense, a soul sense, everything. But it was also like, I want to put myself in situations to where whenever hard things happen, I feel ready. Mm-hmm. I don't run, I face it, right? So the other things that I do kind of routinely now is I sit in a sauna at 145 degrees. I'm learning to taper off a little bit, but I sit in there for 20 minutes. I was sitting in there for 40 minutes and I was about to pass out, and there's like actual scientific proof that the brain doesn't thrive.
You're just becoming a rotisserie chicken at that point.
Correct. It's like, well, you're increasing cortisol because your body's fighting off that sense, right? So anyway, so I had to be disciplined enough to get out after 20 minutes. And then I go straight to a cold plunge at 44 degrees for 4 minutes. There's not a lot of about that cold plunge that I actually enjoy, besides the fact that I know it's something I'm never going to want to do. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say it's a hard thing. It's not a hard thing to sit in a sauna, right? It's easy to do that. But it's also really easy not to do that, right? So like the commitment of I'm going to sit in the sauna every day. But you also, if you proclaim that, like if I tell you I'm going to sit in the sauna every day and then I don't, you're not going to ask me if I did or I didn't. Yeah. So many people rely on if somebody else holds me accountable, then I'll do it. You got to hold yourself accountable, especially the hard things, right? Because nobody's going to ask. And you could lie. I could say, yeah, I sit in the sauna every single day, 3 times a day. And you'd be like, oh, it seems like a lot, but okay. Mm-hmm. But I don't actually sit in the sauna at all, right? But like you're actually depleting your own belief that you can do hard things and be honest about whether or not you're doing the hard things. So, but the cold plunge, I first got into this because I heard about it. I got into about 35-degree water that I set full of ice. I sat in there for like 10 minutes because, it's like go all or not at all. That's also not super suggested or helpful. Mm-hmm. There's a tipping point there too, but there's a ton of benefits. So I was like, okay. But my mindset when I get into that water, even still today, I have a pump now. I use Nuvio's pump that actually controls the temperature for me. So I set the temperature to 44 degrees.
You guys want to sponsor
Nuvio?
Sponsor the?
Yeah, you should. They have a pod. They have everything. But when I get into that water, right before I go in there, I'm like, you don't want to do this, but you're going to do it anyway. Like I don't ever go like, this is so great. I love it. Mm-hmm. Like that also is creating cognitive dissonance and cheapening the hardness of the thing. Yeah. So like say, this is not going to be fun, but I'm going to do it anyway. On those days when you're feeling it or it's raining or it's 120 degrees, it's okay to say, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to because I said I would to myself. Yeah. Not just to you, but I said I was going to, so I'm going to. So I get in the water, and I'll tell you, if you're going to get into cold plunging, be ready to be uncomfortable, right? We've talked about being comfortable, being uncomfortable, right? Comfortable is a great place to be, but uncomfortable is where the growth is. So there's a ton of benefits physically, but also this mental challenge. When I put my feet in that thing, it does not feel good. It actually hurts most of the time. But I convinced myself as I lower down that I'm warming the water up. The water's not making me cold. Now, I talk to people about this all the time. And they're like, that's nuts. But when I sit in that water and I see the temperature right in front of me, I don't hide from it either. Like I've faced this thing. I'm like, we're 44, just like we said. I have a timer set for 4 minutes and I stare at this thing and it goes from 44.0 to 44.1 to 44.2 with me in it. Mm-hmm. So naturally you would think the hotter thing is either getting colder or getting warmer, but the cold plunge isn't doing something to me, right? I'm choosing that. Mm-hmm. I'm choosing to do the hard thing, but then the water actually warms up. Then it feels like I'm strong and I'm capable and all these things. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough shift in your brain to get to that point. But the other thing about hard things is sometimes, like you've already talked about, getting started. So that first minute in the cold plunge, not fun. The next 3 minutes, your body figures it out and I'm comfortable sitting in there at 44 degrees, just not moving because your body quickly figures it out. But sometimes we don't even give ourselves, our brains, our bodies to even figure it out because we don't even start. Or when we start the hard thing and it gets a little uncomfortable. Maybe that first mile doesn't feel so good. You have a choice to make. Mm-hmm. You can keep going and push through it. And then all of a sudden you're like, I just ran 7 miles. But if that first mile doesn't feel good and you go, it's not my day, right? Like we don't even give ourselves that next level. Plus it's also endorphins and all the other good things that come along with it. So that's the other bit of encouragement is really when you're doing something hard, settle in and go like, it's going to get better because I'm going to get better. It's not going to get easier, but it's going to feel easier for me because I actually stuck through it. Mm-hmm. So have you done cold plunge before?
I have not. That would be...
Because you smirked when I was talking about the cold plunge.
Nope.
The polar plunges people talk about all the time, like you go run on the lake and come back. And
my body is like very temperature sensitive.
Sure.
Like I can't... Mary jokes around that I take baby water baths
Sure.
like whenever I take a shower.
Yeah.
For like anything warm or anything cold. My body has like a very strong reaction to that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it would, obviously it probably would benefit me, but I don't think that I would stick with it if I did it.
Yeah.
That's one thing I also try to do is like, try to not set myself up for failure. And by knowing myself and knowing that I do like running. I know I like running and running distance has just never been my thing. So I knew that that's a habit that I could pick up that I would stick with, even though it was hard. Mm-hmm. And then I could use the stepping stones of getting better at that to then transfer it to this area. Another different total example of this that I just thought of is I was afraid of water for my whole life. And like my mom was afraid of drowning and she always had that fear. And so she never took us swimming. Like I literally didn't learn how to swim until I was 17 years old. And that's because me and my high school friends went to the pool and they're like, hey, come on. And I'm like, I can't swim, So that would be another hard thing for me was overcoming my fear of water. But we have little kids, and if we're going swimming, I want to go swimming with them. I want to have that fun with them. We're going to the ocean. We're going to the ocean next month. Mm-hmm. And so I don't ever want to be not able to save them. That's one of the things that comes in my head. And if I'm scared of water, if I can't go under, if I had a fear of going underwater, like even in the shower, I would like not put my whole head underwater at the same time. And I've just done that my whole life. And so we got a pool in our backyard, just one of those like littler pools, but I made it a point. I told Mary, like, now that I have it's in my backyard, it's in a comfortable spot, I'm going to make myself get comfortable going underwater and putting my head underwater. And she was like, I've been around you a long time and you've never, ever even tried. And I was like, just watch. And so the first day that we had that pool filled up, I held onto the edge and I just put my face halfway underwater and then came back up. I'm like, okay, that's not that bad. And then I put my face, mouth and nose underwater. Not that bad. Come back up. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to send it. And so I just went underwater and just held it. And I had my hand on the railing just to make sure, like subconsciously, I have something here. And then I just sat there for as long as I could stand it and realized like, it's actually pretty cool. You can hear all the different things underwater. You can, the kids were talking in the other side of the pool and I could hear what they were saying. And so I just kind of tried to immerse myself in how cool it was to be in that world that I would never be in if I let this fear keep taking over. And then I came up and I'm like, all right, it's done. And so I jumped into the pool, started swimming around underneath, and like that has not been a thing anymore. And that was like 3 years ago. So I would have been 30 years old at that point whenever I conquer my fear of going underwater. That might seem completely irrational of a fear to a lot of people. That might seem mild to some people, It might seem like the end of the world to some people because that's how it felt to me. I thought if I go underwater, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And that had always been the fear in my head that had came actually from my mom's fear. It wasn't actually even my fear. And so I've had a lot of those little things the past few years that I've tried to really work on. We've talked a lot about the inner working and figuring out why we have certain thoughts and why I think the way I do, why I behave the way I do. If you really break all that down, it becomes your thoughts.
Yeah.
Your thoughts become your beliefs. and your beliefs become your actions. And if you alter your thoughts intentionally by doing hard things or thinking about things differently intentionally, thinking about things differently might be the hard thing that you have to do.
Yeah.
That is a barrier for a lot of people. Depression is rampant these days. And I don't know if it's because of any one thing or anything that we could put our finger on, or it's not like you go do hard things and it cures your depression, but I feel like it is a stepping stone if you intentionally put yourself into something and then you prove to yourself that you can do it also, and not go like we used the analogy of the staircase in the last episode. You don't go from the bottom of the staircase to jump to the very top. You have to go to the first step and then the second step. That same analogy can be applied here as doing hard things. The hard things for you literally was going up the stairs,
Yeah.
You had to go to the first step, and it was probably hard to go to the first step at first.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
But then whenever you did that, you could then do the second step because you proved to yourself you did the first one.
Yeah.
And so you have to allow yourself in whatever hard thing you're trying to accomplish to take the first step, to get over the ledge of the first step, and then you prove it to yourself.
Yeah, well, and one thing that I've heard, when you just talked about beliefs, it resonated with me a little bit. So I used to say, if you believe in something long enough, you'll actually start to, or if you think about something long enough, you'll actually start to believe it. And I heard a guy talk the other day, and he said, it's not about believing that you can. That's not the finish line. That's the middle step. So there's a thinking about it, believing you can, and then there's a knowing. So if you think about every hard thing we do, it's a believing that typically makes us take the courageous step. But after you've done it, it becomes a knowing. Like I had claustrophobia. I used to have anxiety and panic attacks. I couldn't ride in a car. I couldn't when I was a kid, we all went on a field trip, and I had this fear that I wasn't going to be able to get out. My whole class crawled into this little cave. My dad was with me. I had all the safety I could possibly need. I watched my whole class go, but I just had this panic of claustrophobia, right? But it just takes a minor disruption with the brain. And so I used to get super anxious before I'd go to school, and my mom gave me this little palm thing. She called it a warm fuzzy, but it's just a little soft ball, right? Like you go to the fabric store and they're just called Poms, P-O-M. And she would give that to me. She'd rub it in her hands and give it to me. And she's like, if you get anxious, because for me, going to school when I was little was anxiety for me, she gave me this little palm and then said, she rubbed it in her hand, made it warm. She said, now put it in your pocket. And if you need me, just reach in your pocket and feel this thing. Every day, for as many days as I needed it to get me through the most anxious first couple days of school, I had this thing in my pocket, right? Whether it's a blanket you had growing up as a kid, whether it's a teddy bear that, whatever. There's a comfort to that. And all that comfort is really doing is distracting your brain from the way you're perceiving the thing. So now I don't have any claustrophobia at all. I had to get an MRI on my knee, multiples. I had to get an MRI on my elbow, injuries, all the things. And there's no way I would have been able to do it if I didn't think about it differently. So similar to your going underwater analogy, I just had to learn how to think about it differently and not think like it was something happening to me, but it was just happening. And then I needed to figure out me in the moment of happening, right?